Hi everyone, it's Miss Olivia. I'm here today to read you guys the Sunday school lesson for this week. Our story takes place in the Garden of Gethsemane, and it takes place right after the Passover dinner that Jesus and all of his friends just had, where Jesus reveals that part of God's plan is for Jesus to die. So our passage today is taken from Luke chapter 22, Mark chapter 14, and John chapter 18. Unfortunately, there is no video for you guys to watch, so I have our Bible from church, and I'm going to be reading you the story, and I'll also show you some pictures. Here we go. The wind was picking up now, blowing clouds across the moon, shrouding the garden in darkness. "Will you stay with me?" Jesus asked his friends. They said yes, and waited under the olive trees. But they were tired, and soon they fell asleep. Jesus walked ahead alone into the dark. He needed to talk to his heavenly Father. Here you can see the garden, and there's all Jesus' friends and his disciples, and they have fallen asleep under the tree. And so Jesus decides to walk a little bit further so he can pray and talk to God by himself. Jesus knew, it was time for him to die. They had planned it long ago, him and God. Jesus was going to take the punishment for all the wrong things that anybody had ever done or ever would do. "Papa, Father," Jesus cried, and he fell to the ground. "Is there any other way for you to get your children back? To heal their hearts? To get rid of the poison?" But Jesus knew there was no other way. All the poison of sin was going to have to go into his own heart. God was going to pour into Jesus's heart all the sadness and brokenness in people's hearts. He was going to pour into Jesus's body all the sickness in people's bodies. God was going to have to blame his son for everything that had gone wrong. It would crush Jesus. But there was something else, something even more horrible, something even more scary. When people ran away from God, they lost God. It was what happened when they ran away. Not being close to God was like a punishment. Jesus was going to take that punishment. Jesus knew what that meant. He would lose his Father, and that, Jesus knew, would break his heart in two. Jesus cried. The sobs shook his whole body. Then Jesus was quiet, just like a lamb. "I trust you, God," he said. "Whatever you say, I will do." There's Jesus in the garden. He's praying and he's crying. But then he says, "I trust you, God." Suddenly, through the trees, a glitter of starlight flashed off of steel. Into the quiet garden came whispers and voices, clanking metal, and the sound of boots marching. Jesus stood up and woke up his friends. "Now is the time," he said gently. "Everything that was written about me, what God has been telling you all the long years, it's all coming true." And into the night, with burning torches and lanterns, with swords and clubs and armor, they came, an army full of soldiers. Judas led them straight to Jesus so they could arrest him. Jesus was waiting for them. There's Judas leading the army to where Jesus is. And look how calm Jesus is. He's just waiting there for them because he knows this is God's plan. He's trusting God. Peter leapt up, took a sword, and tried to save Jesus. He sliced off a guard's ear. Jesus immediately touched the guard and healed him. "Peter," he said, "this is not the way." Peter didn't realize that no army, no matter how big, could ever arrest Jesus, not unless Jesus let them. Then Jesus, who has never done anything wrong except love people, was arrested as if he were the bad guy. Jesus' friends were afraid. They were scared, so they ran away and hid in the dark shadows. There's Peter, and he's trying to save Jesus. He ends up cutting this guy's ear off, but then Jesus heals the man's ear. The guards marched Jesus off and took him to the leaders. The leaders put Jesus on trial. "Are you the Son of God?" they asked. "I am," Jesus said. "Who do you think you are to call yourself God? You must die for calling yourself God." Only the Romans were allowed to kill prisoners, so the leaders made a plan. "We'll tell the Romans, this man wants to be our king, and then they will crucify him." But it would be all right. It was God's plan. "It was for this reason that I was born into the world," Jesus said. There's Jesus with the leaders. And that is the end of our story this week. This week, we've learned that God has a plan. Jesus and God made a rescue plan for us. But part of that plan is, unfortunately, that Jesus would have to die. But that isn't the end of the plan, and that's not the end of this big story. So hopefully we see you next week, where you can hear the next part of our story and the next part of God's plan to save us.